Now, in today's Let's Talk Some Star Wars video, I want to discuss some of the problems with the other sources of canon, and those are of course all the books, comics, games, animated shows, and so on, or basically anything that furthers the story of Star Wars outside of the movies and is part of the same universe that they take place in. And coming from someone who has kept up with roughly 95% of it and will eventually get to everything, I can say, in my opinion, that most of it's been pretty good, but what's been truly impressive about it is the level of interconnectivity to it. For example, the newest Thrawn novel called Alliances, which I hope to do a review on in the next few days, takes place shortly after Season 3 of Rebels and references events that happened in it. And many of the other books, comics, and so on have done this very same thing, where they've mentioned events or included characters from other books or Rebels or wherever else it might be and helped create an even larger running narrative or bigger picture for the Star Wars galaxy. And even the anthology movies have done a great job of this, with Rogue One using a character from the Clone Wars, that being Saw Gerrera, not to mention including several appearances or references to characters from Rebels. There was even a book called Catalyst, which came out a few months before the movie, and it's a prelude to Rogue One and is a fantastic companion piece to the movie, and it sets the stage for the movie and develops many of the characters, especially some of those who had limited screen time, like Jin's parents, for example. And if you read the book before watching the movie for the first time, it likely had a lot more impact on you when, in the opening scene of the movie, Jin's mother, Lyra, gets shot and killed, because you got to know her character and you know her well in Catalyst, and how her and Krennic, who killed her, were always subtly at odds with each other. And spoiler alert for those who haven't seen Solo yet, but including Darth Maul in that movie was pretty much the ultimate acknowledgement of the other sources of canon, since he made his triumphant return in the Clone Wars, where not every fan would have gotten to see it since they didn't watch that show. And I'm sure there were plenty of Star Wars fans who were very confused to see him still alive and well in that movie, though yes, a lot of those fans, probably one way or the other, had heard he was back. The sequel trilogy movies, on the other hand, or episodes 7 and 8, have done almost none of this. Yes, they have obviously continued and referenced the story of their previous two saga trilogies, and that is what they should be focused on, no doubt. But it feels like they've wasted a great opportunity to truly unite the entire canon into one giant narrative, even by just including a few subtle references to things that have transpired elsewhere. One of the few things they have done in this regard is to very briefly show the compass that Luke recovered in the story mode of Battlefront 2, though it had zero bearing on the story. More than likely, it was simply a background prop that those who created the story for the game somehow saw or were shown and were told would be in the movie, and were given the opportunity to give it a backstory. And then there's the book Bloodline, which takes place 6 years before the events of The Force Awakens, and was said to have been given input from Rian Johnson himself, and was going to offer clues about what would happen in The Last Jedi, yet it didn't do that. And I'm not saying it should have spoiled the movie, or have been required reading to understand the movie, but it had very little relevance, if any at all, to The Last Jedi, and was a wasted opportunity to do something that directly tied in with it. And I'm not saying it was a bad book, I actually enjoyed it. But going back to Catalyst again, by no means was that required reading, nor did it spoil anything from Rogue One, but it still managed to tie in extremely well and be relevant and enhance the movie. And there's no reason that couldn't have been done with a book for The Last Jedi. And I certainly think this is more about a reluctance to spoil absolutely anything about the coming saga movies, and is not an inability by either the writers or creative minds at Lucasfilm to make these types of relevant stories happen. In fact, I think had there been a book about Ben's training under Luke that came out before The Last Jedi, and showed how Ben was slipping further and further to the dark side despite Luke's best efforts, and how maybe both of them, to some extent, were being influenced by Snoke, this powerful dark side entity like nothing we'd ever seen before, it could have given the context some people needed to buy Luke almost murdering Ben in his sleep. And no, I'm not saying you show that moment in the book and ruin the movie, but you begin to build up to it in this book so that, in a sense, people are ready for it when it happens in the movie without them even realizing that's what they've been geared up and prepared for. Not to mention, such a book, told from both Luke and Ben's perspective, could have greatly enhanced how the movie showed that moment from both their points of view. And you could of course say, well, they can still write such a book after the fact. And yeah, they probably will actually. But both the opportunity to enhance the movie ahead of time and the damage that moment caused without proper context is already done and over with. Not to mention, any attempt to explain that scene further is now going to be met with cries of those claiming, They're only trying to patch up a mistake. And not to get into this same old argument here, but that's really the problem most had with that scene of Luke almost murdering Ben. It had no context or good explanation for them. In other words, they didn't earn it. And those who say, well, look at all Luke went through in the original trilogy. Of course he broke. Those people seem to forget how Luke stood triumphant at the end of the original trilogy, despite all he'd already gone through. So to say that's what broke him after the fact, after he'd already overcome it, is not the greatest storytelling in the opinion of many. Anyway, to get back on target here, I think the Aftermath series of books is another great example of a wasted opportunity. It, along with a comic book series called Shattered Empire, were the first two stories in the new canon that took place after the events of Return of the Jedi. And though Shattered Empire was pretty good for a short 4-book run, Aftermath was instead hated by a lot of fans. Not because it was a bad story, though some thought it was, but mostly because it seemed to be almost actively avoiding any true relevance to what would happen in the sequel trilogy. And this has easily been my biggest problem with the other sources of canon thus far, that there seems to be this reluctance to allow anything truly important to happen there that may in some way, shape, or form reveal something in relation to the sequel trilogy. So instead of releasing books and comics that greatly enhance the sequel trilogy and help tell the story as it goes along, they've only been releasing after-the-fact stories that do little more than slightly elaborate on events that already happened, or highlight the pasts of characters that really aren't that important to the grand scheme of things. Basically what I'm saying is there was this chance to tell one giant story about this new time period of Star Wars, but so far they're failing, though they've proven they can do it, and do it well because it's been happening with every other time period thus far. And the thing is, a book about Rey set between episodes 8 and 9, released before 9 comes out, might go a long way in swaying the hearts and minds of some fans about her, not to mention would be greatly appreciated by those who already love the character and are excited to see what becomes of her in the next movie. This story about Rey's early struggles to understand what it means to be a Jedi without a teacher could even subtly give us clues about the state of the galaxy and what Kylo Ren is up to. It doesn't have to spoil anything that will happen in the final movie of the trilogy, but if done right, could set the stage for that final movie and get some excited for it who might not otherwise be right now, or increase the excitement level of those who are already on the edge of their seat waiting for it. Not to mention, it would create a richer, fuller story overall, and I feel that's where the sequel trilogy is coming up a bit short right now, in world building and character development. And why Lucasfilm doesn't do something like this, why they don't try to build this trilogy in the other sources of canon as it goes along, is beyond me. And considering the script for episode 9 is already written and filming is beginning, which means a talented writer has more than enough time to write this book, and they have more than enough time to get the thing mass produced and distributed before 9 comes out, I really don't know why Lucasfilm doesn't take the easy money and do something the fans would love and appreciate. So why it doesn't happen, other than the fact that they don't want to spoil absolutely anything about episode 9, is again completely beyond me. Okay then, let's move on to some comments from others who weighed in on this topic about the other sources of canon, starting with Ill-Made Knight, who at the start of his comment is quoting me from the video where I initially brought up this topic. The two sequel trilogy movies have, for better or worse, been a separate entity. Wholly agree. I was saying this to a friend just the other day. The sequel trilogy so far feels like an attempt by Disney and Lucasfilm's new leadership to claim Star Wars for themselves, where Rebels and the A Star Wars Story movies have felt more like genuine and respectful attempts to grow the canon, headed by people who care about Star Wars and its characters and don't just see Star Wars as a platform to use for their own ends. And I do, of course, agree with this, because it does feel like everything outside the sequel trilogy movies has been about honoring what Star Wars has always been and growing the canon, while the sequel trilogy has felt like something that's been blazing its own path, if you will. And this has been an odd approach because it feels like Star Wars is being tugged in two different directions right now by two groups of people who don't share the same goal or vision. And of course, that's just my outsider's assessment of the situation. I won't claim to know what goes on behind closed doors at Lucasfilm or what their overall plan or approach is, nor am I saying it's a bad thing to take Star Wars in a new direction. That's something that's going to need to happen if it's going to survive long term. Though as I've said before, I'm not sure the sequel trilogy was the time and place to do that. I feel like trying to honor the original characters more could have worked just as well, if not more so, and likely wouldn't have caused any type of controversy. And then once the Skywalker saga was complete, or at least for now, You move full speed ahead with new characters, new stories, and pretty much everyone would have agreed it was time for that. The next comment then comes to us from Joel Mont Animations, who said, I think Disney is doing a great job with non-sequel trilogy stuff. I think Rogue One was perfect story-wise, and Solo was a little rough around the edges, but good, and it makes me intrigued for Kenobi and Boba Fett films. I've been getting caught up on the books, and they are pretty good. I do wish they would make Star Wars stuff aimed for older audiences. The Forces of Destiny and Resistance are things I'm really not interested. And honestly, I get the sense a lot of people out there feel very similar to this, that they've been happy with most of what Lucasfilm has been doing with Star Wars under the Disney banner, outside of maybe the sequel trilogy films, though of course plenty have been perfectly happy with those as well. I myself have enjoyed pretty much everything outside of The Last Jedi, and things like Forces of Destiny, which yes, I do watch because I do watch everything canon, and it is considered canon. Well, those things are clearly not aimed at me, but rather at a much, much younger audience, and that's fine. My fear is that Resistance is going to be the same way, though, aimed at a much younger audience, even more so than Rebels, though I am rather curious to see what Filoni does in the sequel trilogy time period. Anyway, I don't usually hear too many people complaining about the other sources of canon all that much. Most of the stories, from my point of view, have been well done and are clearly written by those with a deep love and understanding for Star Wars. As I laid out earlier, the issues I've had with it is a lack of sometimes going big with the story, or a willingness to tackle the time periods, characters, or events that would be relevant to the sequel trilogy and could enhance those movies. And again, not doing that seems like a wasted opportunity to me. Okay, the last comment I'm going to get to in this video is from Ultron563, who said, I've actually enjoyed what Lucasfilm has been putting out under Disney. Yes, the movies included. The only things I haven't been too crazy about is Solo and Forces of Destiny. To be honest, Rebels is probably my favorite Star Wars thing. I know I'm going to get hanged for that, lol. It's just more my kind of thing and matches more of the stuff I'm into. And this, of course, goes along with pretty much what I've been saying here, that I think in general most people are happy with a vast majority of what Disney has done. The sticking point for most is, of course, The Last Jedi, though the other movies also have their lovers and haters. And I honestly don't think anyone is going to criticize or hang you for liking Rebels. When you consider the limits it had to deal with because it was on Disney XD, I think it was done fantastically. Now, could it have been done better if it were on another channel and would have been aimed more at an adult crowd? Sure, but I certainly understand most Star Wars is aimed for children of all ages. Though I think there is a very hungry adult market waiting for a series aimed directly at them, and the Old Republic seems like the perfect playground for such a show to take place. Well, that's all I've got for this time, and now's where I again turn it over to all of you to have your say on anything and everything talked about in this video. This is also where I'm going to ask for your suggestions for next week's Let's Talk Some Star Wars video topic, and in the next day or two I'll put up a poll with some of your suggestions and allow you all to vote. And hopefully before next weekend, I'll get up a discussion starter video on that topic so that you can all have your say and I can focus entirely on your comments in next weekend's video. Anyway, for now, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.